today I'm going to be going over the GoPro mount on my spear gun, how I get all the footage from my dives, and why I went with this system. So before we begin, this is actually kind of key, but I use a Pathos Sniper 85 roller gun. I love this gun. It's been super awesome so far. And this is important because this solution may not work for your gun, so just keep that in mind, mainly because the width of the mounting point right behind the gun might be a little bit wider on your gun versus this Pathos Sniper. I found that a couple buddies that actually has Salvamar guns, this system is not ideal. It does work, but it's not as snug of a fit. So just keep that in mind and try to do a little test fitting before. So this is my GoPro mount setup, and what I have is actually a bicycle handlebar mount attached to one of these arms that are, I believe, for motorcycles. So it goes kind of around the helmet like this, so you can get it, the camera right in front. And then obviously the GoPro housing and the GoPro inside. So why did I go with this mount? Mainly due to the flexibility, and mainly for loading it helps. It's a little easier than the traditional, which I'll show you in a bit, and the B-roll I can get without pointing the gun or having the gun in the shot like this. So just really briefly, we're gonna go from handlebar mount to the GoPro housing. So this handlebar mount, it's slightly modified. I filed down where the hex nut usually sits in, but that's pretty much it. Other than that, I use some other hardware. You'll notice here, it's not your traditional GoPro hardware. And the reason for that is one, stainless steel doesn't rust, so I wanted stainless steel parts. And secondly, I didn't want these huge GoPro fasteners in the way. So what I found at the local hardware store are some hardware, stainless steel, of course, prevent rust. So these guys right here. So 10-24 is the size that I found to be the best suited for this. So I got 10-24 hex nuts and 10-24 oval Phillips screws, or yeah, there. And then I also paired that all with some flat washers that I want to help fasten. They're number 10, just so you know, if you want to go look for these yourself, these are the ones I used. Anyway, so with the mount, you'll see that I used one screw at the bottom, right there. I use a washer right after that, a washer in between the plastic, and then washer, 2 nuts. So the reason for the 2 nuts, the first one for fastening, second one more for insurance purposes. I initially did the 1 nut, and I found that sometimes it becomes loose, and with the 2 nut system, it hasn't done anything wrong. So it's been good so far. So I have that, I fastened that down, and then you'll notice because of the inherent nature of this mount being circular for a handlebar, it's not as flush of a snug fit with the spear gun. So what I did is I actually added a little rubber piece, if you could see that there. And you'll see it when I put this together to hopefully fill in that gap. And I think you might be able to see some real estate underneath the mount, if you know what I'm talking about. You see that little bit of light right there? There you go. Hopefully you guys can see that. But that was the main purpose of adding a little bit of rubber in there. So far it hasn't been an issue. It does wobble a little bit, but not enough to see it on camera or to fail. So I have the mount, and then next up I have this arm. So like I mentioned earlier, I love the B-roll purposes of this, but I also love that it is a little bit more friendly in terms of loading, at least for me. Mainly because when I initially load from my hip to get the assist, so what I do first is push this down, put it on my hip, and when I lean over to load the gun, like so, it doesn't get in the way. And then when I want to chest load for the final way there, I pull this all the way up, put on my chest, then load like that, and it's totally out of the way. Versus the more traditional spear gun mount, this guy right here. So this one's a little bent because it was living, I left this in my box and it got a little bent, but it's really well made. It's stainless steel. This one usually sits right underneath the reel. So you take the reel apart, you stick this in there, and you screw it in with the reel, and it sticks something like that, or the other way, like so. So the benefits of this is that the gun is really stable in the shot. It kind of uses uses the gun as like an alignment point, and you'll see in some footage here of how it looks like. So overall, I love the mount when it's recording. One of the biggest downsides I found is if I wanted some B-roll with some buddies or some B-roll of something I didn't necessarily want to accidentally shoot, I found it hard to adjust the camera in the water confidently and then put it back to where it was without getting it loose. And secondly, the biggest gripe I had was having the GoPro mount like this and loading it. I always found I had a hard time when I loaded from my chest. Toward the last fin, I would have to kind of go over and maneuver around that GoPro to get it to the last fin. I heard from some other spear fishermen that if you put it upside down, it works great, but I didn't like the idea, or I just wasn't a huge fan, mainly because of the B-roll, and it was a little clunky. I just didn't like it that much. So I tried this out and I've loved it ever since. And the biggest drawback you'll probably notice, obviously, is that this is directly in the line of sight of when you shoot. So to go about going around that, I adjusted my style of aiming. So what I do, instead of looking directly down the line like so, I actually pivot my gun slightly to the left, and I use the gun and use the line of the gun to kind of figure out where I'm shooting. It's not the best system, but I've gotten used to it and I'm pretty confident I can hit most things. So that's what I do with this. So let's figure out how you put this GoPro mount on. All right, let's put this thing together. So what you'll need is the actual handlebar mount right here. We have our rubber, you can use any piece of material really, but I have a little piece of rubber here. The arm, that plastic arm. You want 2 of these GoPro fasteners, I don't know the official name, but you want 2 of those there. Of course, the GoPro waterproof case. In my case, I actually use a GoPro 7 Black. This guy, if you have a newer GoPro, obviously use that one. But GoPro, 6 washers, 2 hex nuts. Remember it's 10-24 for the sizing, if you were wondering again. And then the 2 screws, and then some pliers and a Phillips. So let's dive in. So what I like to do is first grab the bottom portion of the handlebar mount, and then I stick the rubber in there, kind of put it together loosely by hand, and I hold one side firm. And what you want to do is screw with a washer to start. Goes in to one side, and remember you want a washer between the plastic as well, so like so. Put it through, and then at the top another washer, hex nut, put that down finger tight. You don't want it super, you want it to give some a little bit of room, because we're going to adjust this to fit around the gun. And then one more hex nut. There. Cool. So that's roughly in there. So from this position, we're going to put it on the gun and then finish off the tightening. So we have the spear gun here. So we're going to rotate the mount that we have in our hand sideways. Put this around the back. Make sure everything's fitting nicely. And then pretty much repeat the same thing on the other side. So we got our screw, washer, and then we need that washer in between the 2 pieces of plastic on the handlebar mount. Another washer, hex nut, and then lastly, the last hex nut. All right, so we want to get these both finger tight, and this is where our pliers and our Phillips comes in. So what you want to do is start one side, and then tighten these down. So what I do is I actually grab both hex nuts with the pliers to start, tighten down pretty firm. We're going to do the last bit of tightening at the end, but you just want these pretty firm to begin. So grab the hex nuts. So once you got those pretty tight, now we want to do the final tightening. What you want to do is go back to the place you began. tighten while grabbing both hex nuts. And now what we're gonna do is hold with the Phillips and grab only the top nut. And then we're gonna try to tighten with just the pliers. Make sure that's fastened in there, perfect. Repeat on the other side. Do that. Cool. So again, Phillips in and tighten the top screw. Cool. Awesome. So that's tight, nice and snug. As you can see there, that's how it should look. Boom. From the side. Remember, it's screw, washer, 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 screw, or hex nut, hex nut. Perfect. So next up, pretty easy after this if you've messed with anything GoPro related. So it's pretty self-explanatory. You want to put the arm. Oh, one thing, key thing before we begin is actually you want the hex nut portion or the nut portion where this is going to mount on the handlebar away from you. So what I mean by that is I'm right-handed, so I'm going to shoot right-handed like this. I don't want these fasteners in my way or another thing to be in my way while I'm shooting. So make sure this, or at least for me, I like these outside so I'm not seeing them as much. So let's put this in, and we want to use a longer fastener, GoPro fastener. I know there's shorter ones than this, and just so you know, when I do this, I typically do make contact with the screw from the handlebar mount, so don't be surprised if you see scrape marks along your GoPro fastener. So you want this tight, pretty firm, hand tight is good enough for now. The next up, of course, the easy part, our GoPro mount. Put that in there, use our fastener. So one thing I will say, what I do is actually I put the GoPro mount at its highest position that it will go, and I tighten it down as hard as I can because I will not be moving the actual camera. I'll be using this arm. So I don't want this part to move when I'm diving. I'm okay with this moving, but I don't want this to move. So the question comes down to how firm do you need to tighten this first GoPro fastener. I like to do it a little hand tight, pretty firm, or pretty firm, not too tight. So use your Phillips, or if you want to use your hand, pretty tight. Some good resistance there, but you don't want it to be overly tight because you want that flexibility to move this, but you want it to be firm enough so when you fire the gun, the camera does stay in place. And of course, lastly, stick in your GoPro and you're good to go. So there you go, there you have your mount. So you have your handlebar mount, the arm, and of course your GoPro at the end. So one last thing I want to leave you guys with are the settings that I use for the GoPro. Again, this is a GoPro 7 Black. And some key things I make sure I have the rabbit mode on the GoPro, and also battery saver mode on. So once I start recording, it actually stops the screen in the back or it turns it black after, I believe, 5 seconds. The reason for that is battery life, and the rabbit mode helps kind of start, stop recording and on and off at the same time, which is super key in the water if you want your battery to last. So let me give you an example of how I do that, or how that looks in action. So I'm ready to dive. I hit record on my case, so right here, I just click once, I hear the beeps, and I'll actually start recording, if you can see that. So start recording, I dive, I do my thing, and then I come back to the surface and I'm done. Click once to stop recording, it actually turns off the camera automatically. So this is key. And one last thing you'll notice is actually I do have the beeps on. Personally, I like the beeps because it lets me know what's going on without me looking at my camera all the time, because I have that screensaver part on. I know a lot of people don't like that because it might scare off the fish. At least for me, it's okay for now, unless friend catches a big yellowtail with this, without this thing. So we'll see. But I do like those settings. How you get to those settings, if you're curious, is when you turn your GoPro on, you scroll down from the bottom and you see that little rabbit symbol there. You want that blue. And then of course you have, if you want to turn the beeps off, you can do so right there. So that's what I like to do for my GoPro settings, but the biggest thing is definitely that rabbit feature is huge. The battery life usually lasts barely one session for me, and usually I'm in the water for about, the winter is a little different, but typically at least 3 hours or so with some dive buddies. So that rabbit mode is key. I love it. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is the GoPro mount that I use on my dives. Let me know if you have any questions, suggestions, or any other mounts that you use when you dive. But I hope this helps some people out there. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next video.